This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
What's going on, Real MVPs? Welcome back to another edition, another episode of What's Your Fantasy. This is week 8. And welcome in, Brandon Swanson, and with me, as always, is Ricky Widmer.
What's up, guys?
And before we get started this week, I always get really excited. I almost always go right into it, but without doing my household chores here. And the first thing is make sure to go and check out Patreon.com and become a patron here with MVP. An absolutely outstanding opportunity to help support us here at MVP and the good things that we are doing and trying to do for you, our viewers and our listeners, each and every week by providing you good content. You can help support us by donating $1 each month. That would be outstanding for us, and we would be so appreciative. $10 a month gets you to the opportunity to come on one of these podcasts. You can come on and talk fantasy football with Ricky and I. You can go and talk the onside kick with Ricky and Mark. You can go and talk fast break with Ricky and Sean and Dave. And there's one consistent factor. Ricky is on everything. So we have to give it to the big man. He does an awesome job here at MVP. He works his booty off, that is for sure. Also, make sure to go and check out mostvaluablepodcast.com. Get a T-shirt, MVP T-shirt. Dave Oster is modeling that T-shirt there. I know we need to keep I keep saying it. We need to get a new model for that. Maybe more people would buy them. But the final thing is head over to iTunes and give us that 5-star rating. That's what we're looking for. Hopefully, that's what we're deserving of. And write us a little review. We would be very appreciative of that as well. So with those things out of the way and aside, Ricky, as always, every single week, I'm going to toss it over to you and ask you, big man, how did we do this week? The last couple of weeks have been real good for us. How did this week turn out?
Yeah, I got to apologize to you, Brandon. I'm sorry because I forgot about our fantasy team this week. I did not realize.
What was more important?
Just nothing really. The games had started and it was like 15 minutes after 12 here in the Central Time Zone, and I was like, oh shit, what's your fantasy lineup? And I checked, I was like, oh, Mark Ingram's in, and I'm like, oh, I don't want none of the late guys, and I picked up a San Francisco running back, and we might have lost 157 to 128. Todd Gurley did really good for us, Adam Thielen did really good for us, but the rest of our team did not. However, got to give hats off to Dallas. His team did phenomenal. He had James Conner did really well. Julio Jones did really well. Russell Wilson showed up for a 20-point game. He got 18 points out of his kicker because he had Harrison Butker in that game against New England, who had 4 field goals and 4 extra points. So he had 18 points from his kicker. So I'm just going to chalk it up to we got outplayed this week. And in the standings, what that does for us is we are now tied. Jake is now leading our division at 4-2. However, we are 4-2 tied. It is a 3-way tie between Jake, ourselves, and then Kyle, a.k.a. Super Hippo. And if we look at the projected playoff bracket, we are the 4th team in the bracket, and we would have a showdown with Dallas, who we just lost to this past weekend.
Ricky, one of the pieces I wanted to talk about on our team who had been for a little while consistent at the beginning of the season, what's going on right now with our man over there in Houston? He has been struggling a little bit. What is going on right now?
I have no idea, and he was one that I wanted to take out of the lineup because what I think...
This is Wolf Fuller, by the way, everybody. Wolf Fuller.
What I think what we're going to have to do with Wolf Fuller is he's got 3.5 and 5.3 for us the last 2 weeks. I'm going to do it right now just so I don't forget. I think it is time for us to take Julian Edelman and just slot him in right there as our wide receiver 2. So now we've got our 2 wide receivers of Adam Thielen and Julian Edelman, and Will Fuller might have to ride the bench for a little bit. The question that I have for you, though, about our team is Calvin Ridley. He's been on a slide, the first slide of his rookie season, 7.8 and 7.7. He got injured in the last game. Do we keep him in on the flex? Do we put a Lamar Miller in who hasn't been great? Do we put in an Austin Eckler, a D.D. Westbrook? What do we do with that flex spot this week?
Well, I think it's really important, obviously, to monitor the injury to Calvin Ridley. That's going to be first and foremost. What we have to do is take a look and see if he's going to end up playing, if he's participating in practice this week. But if he is, I'd say still roll with him because he's due for another breakout game. But if he is not, I think a guy that we might be able to put in is possibly a D.D. Westbrook, maybe that Austin Eckler, because of how the game could go in London against Tennessee. That's kind of what my thinking is as of right now while we're recording.
Yeah, and I mean, also we'll have to, obviously I'm going to ask you these questions off the podcast because we don't want to give away what we're going to do, but there are going to be some wide receivers that I ask you about that we'll probably have to hit in waivers today, well, tonight as we're recording it, to see if we can get them for this week in the NFL.
Well, Ricky, that'll take us into our first topic here today, and it's one that you are going to love.
Hell yeah.
I know you're going to love it, and it is Adam Thielen. Has he cemented his spot as the best wide receiver in fantasy football? And there's been really no one else as good or as consistent as Adam Thielen. He has been doing just a tremendous job. He has 6 straight weeks of over 100 receiving yards with 4 touchdowns. He's only hit under 20 fantasy points once, week 1. And right now, there's no reason to expect that he would stop that trend. The Vikings face the Jets. They rank 23rd in pass defense. Is there really any answer there for him? This is a guy who truly, and I'll say it again, I was disappointed with Ricky when he picked Adam Thielen when it was either Thielen, Mike Evans, or Tyreek Hill. Now, I think we would have been really happy with Tyreek Hill.
Yeah.
But come to find out, I think we would have been disappointed with Mike Evans. So I'm happy to have Adam Thielen right now on our team. And I'll just pose the question to you, and I think I know exactly what you're going to say, but I still want to talk about it. Is Adam Thielen the best wide receiver in fantasy football right now, and do you see that stopping?
Now, by the numbers, yes, he is. And the reason why I say that is you look at it, and out of all wide receivers in PPR formats, he's got the most points so far. And like you said, Tyreek Hill wouldn't have been that bad. He's only about 20 points less than Adam Thielen. But the thing that I like about Adam Thielen this year, and I didn't really know this, like I had a hunch only because I'm a Vikings fan and I like Adam Thielen, and I wasn't high on Patrick Mahomes in the offseason. I didn't expect him to be what he was. Definitely wasn't high on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That's why I went with Adam Thielen. But in PPR especially, what you got to look at is the only week that Adam Thielen has not had at least 24 points or 24 and a half points was the very first week that Kirk Cousins was in town. Ever since then, he's had 3 games of 11 or more receptions, so that's easily 11 points for you on those games. And in every game except for 2, he's had a touchdown. So to me, it looks like early on, he's getting 31% of the team's targets. Kirk Cousins just likes him. He is just a big old safety blanket for Kirk Cousins, and I don't see this stopping anytime soon because Like, coming up, they've got the Jets, who I think he could have a good performance against. New Orleans, who, yeah, he's used to playing this team. They played each other in the playoffs. I think he could have his normal of at least 24 points against that team. Detroit, I don't see stopping him that much. The Bears will be interesting because I'm not worried about their secondary, but I am worried about their pass rush. And then week 12, it's like Green Bay's not going to be a problem. New England won't be a problem. Seattle won't be a problem. Like, the defenses on this schedule for the Vikings, the only one the rest of the way that I'm going to use air quotes and say worried about, because they're probably the best secondary that we play on the schedule, is going to be New Orleans. So I see there is, unless Kirk Cousins or Adam Thielen gets hurt, there is no reason why he shouldn't be able to continue what he is doing right now.
Ricky, do you have to worry at all that one of these weeks and then it just switches, on a drop of a hat, that all of a sudden these teams are finally locking down Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs is the guy? And Thielen is the one who's getting maybe 10 points or 11 points or something like that, where Stephon Diggs is going off for 15, 20, 25, something like that. Is that a worry that maybe comes into your mind, especially you knowing the Minnesota Vikings a little bit more than I?
Now, the thing I'm going to say is my first reaction is going to be no. However, let's look at it. The only 3 times this year that Adam Thielen has had under 11 receptions in a game, the first one was the San Francisco game. Stephon Diggs only had 3 in that one. And I know Kyle Rudolph's another one that I should probably be pulling up as well. But that first game, I kind of almost want to take that and throw it out the window, because Kirk Cousins was just getting acclimated to this Viking team. Like, Kyle Rudolph only had 1 catch in that week 1 game, and it was a 11-yard touchdown in that one. So that's why that first one, it's like, all right, Adam Thielen still had more receptions. Against the Rams, Adam Thielen only had 8 receptions. Yes, Stephon Diggs had 11 for more yardage, but who had the touchdown in that game? Actually, if you look at it, Stephon Diggs had more yardage Thielen had more yardage than Diggs on less receptions, but who also had the touchdown? It was Adam Thielen. And then in the Philly game, 7 receptions, 116 yards for Thielen. 10 receptions, 91 yards for Stephon Diggs. But the one thing that is going to be crucial and may not hurt if you have these games where Diggs has the double-digit receptions and Thielen only has the single digits, the one thing I'm noticing is Diggs only has 3 touchdowns, and they both came in the first 2 weeks. Ever since week, I'm going to say 4, so 4, 5, and 6, Thielen has had 1 touchdown. He is becoming Kirk Cousins' go-to guy, especially when he needs a touchdown.
No, he definitely is. Kirk Cousins is going to Thielen in the biggest moments, and Thielen is certainly showing why he is one of the best wide receivers, not just in fantasy land, but one of the better wide receivers in the NFL. I think that that argument can also be made as well. He's so consistent. That's the thing, is he provides a consistent presence and makes consistent plays week in and week out. And that's certainly what I think he showed it last year when I felt like he really came onto the scene. And now he's on the scene. He's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and I mean, the one thing I'm looking at right now is what many people would expect because of how he was drafted. And Antonio Bryant is the weird one in this, because you would expect him to be the number 1 wide receiver, and his point totals haven't been terrible, except for like the yardage is all off. Or Thielen, the thing that is helping him is every single game this year, he's had over 100 yards. And in 3 of the games, like I said, he's had double-digit receptions. And in every game but 2, he's had at least two. He's had at least one touchdown. Whereas like in Antonio Brown, he's also been struggling this year, where he hasn't eclipsed more than 9 receptions since week 2, but he hasn't eclipsed over 9 receptions at all this year. And ever since like before the last 2 games they played, he just got to over 100 yards. But for the most part, Antonio Brown was being capped at like 93 was his most, and then 67, 50, and 62. So I think that's kind of playing into this as well. Of course, Adam Thielen is having a great year, but guys like Antonio Brown and Julio Jones, who usually have that top spot in fantasy, they have been struggling also this year, which has opened the door for Adam Thielen to be the top of the fantasy numbers.
Ricky, the next thing I wanted to talk about is the running game over in New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
So the week before the Saints went on their bye, they got back a very important member, and that was Mark Ingram. He missed his 4-week suspension. He came back in the historic game for Drew Brees, where he passed Peyton Manning's passing yards record, and he did it in a stylish way. And it was unfortunately a night I was playing against Drew Brees, and he ended up beating me. But I'm not salty about it, clearly. But I think that the important thing here is Mark Ingram is now back for this running game. It certainly helps New Orleans. It is something that's great for them because they don't have to completely rely on Alvin Kamara. Not that they couldn't, but I think to save him and not ruin him, I think as a running back, put so much on him. Now that Ingram comes back, though, we saw what the split was in that game where Alvin Kamara got 6 carries, Ingram got 16, he got the 2 touchdowns. Is that something that you might worry about going forward, that Ingram's going to be used more, or that even still with him coming back, that's going to hurt Kamara's value? Or do you think that that's something where these 2 guys are both going to be consistent, solid guys that you can put in your lineup each and every week that are going to score good points, that you're happy to have, or is this a situation that you want to monitor that you might be a little worried about?
I'm not worried about it, but I am going to monitor it. And the reason why is I don't think it's something where it's like, ooh, Mark Ingram had a really good game. Alvin Kamara did not. So I got to bench Alvin Kamara now. The thing you got to put into perspective is what the Saints wanted to do in that Washington game is they came in with the game plan of, hey, we're going to lean on Mark Ingram a little bit more because we want to give Alvin Kamara a rest after he had carried the load so much in the first 4 games while Mark Ingram was suspended. And I feel like now after the bye, they're going to go more back to what we had seen last year, where you might have a game where both of them get their points, but there might be some games where we see what we saw, where like a Mark Ingram has 20-some points and Kamara only has 6, or like Kamara has 20-some points and Mark Ingram only has 6 or 7. So you're going to roll the dice. There are going to be some games where, depending on how each play, where they have like a sub, not double-digit kind of game. But I think what played into that Week 5 game was the game plan for the Saints going heavy with Mark Ingram to give Alvin Kamara a little bit of a break. And also, you got to look at it. Mark Ingram, he only had 53 yards on the ground and 20 yards receiving. The big reason why in PPR he had 21.3 points is he punched it into the end zone 2 times. So that's going to be key as well. How many touchdowns is Mark Ingram going to get this year with the Saints?
And does Mark Ingram provide a little bit more value? Because I think everyone pretty much knows he's going to be the goal line guy.
I mean, yes and no. The reason why is I feel like what they're going to go to is, like you said, Mark Ingram will be the goal line guy. Alvin Kamara still, though, has value because when they're looking to pass the ball, he's going to be able to get his points. Like, I feel like Kamara will mainly get his points like last year, mainly through the air, where if you look at last year, he was like most of the rushing totals. He only cracked 100 rushing yards one time on the season a year ago. Most of them were like, he had games like the one against Tampa Bay that ended the year week 17. He only had 9 carries for 44 yards and a touchdown on the ground, but had 30.8 points in that game because he had 6 receptions, because he had 84 yards through the air. So, I mean, that's why to me, Kamara's value is still value because of what he can do in the receiving game. And the big thing that's going to help is, especially in PPR, he's going to get a point for every reception. Mark Ingram is not going to get a point for every carry that he has.
Is there one guy that you would rather own over the other, especially if you're talking a standard league?
Standard, I'm going Mark Ingram. Like, if I'm going standard, I'm going Mark Ingram because I feel like this year, just by looking at, like, if I go to, let me see if I can pull up our kind of waivers really quick. If I go to the guys that are available in our league as a kind of base, your top running backs are Jalen Richard, Frank Gore, and Duke Johnson, whereas your wide receiver guys are Albert Wilson, Taylor Gabriel, Cole Beasley. And the reason why I bring that up, I know that Kamara is still a running back, but the kind of average off of, I know there's some people that are going to say, yeah, but Ricky, I would like to have those PPR points from my running back as well. I think Mark Ingram's going to be a guy where he is going to get those goal line, like he is going to be a guy that has more success punching it in, where he might have 2 rushing touchdowns, where it's like Alvin Kamara, yeah, he's got the receptions, but he might not have gotten into the end zone in this game. So the points might even out, but I feel like with Mark Ingram, he's going to have more touchdowns, which has the potential to be a bigger game. But I could be wrong with this one. Really, it's splitting hairs at this point. If I have one of them, I'm happy, but maybe I'm just saying Mark Ingram because that's who we own in our league and that's who I own in our personal league.
Next topic, Ricky.
Mm-hmm.
There are big problems in big uh-oh. And I'm calling New York big uh-oh because Dallas is like big D. New York is just big uh-oh. It is a big problem. And the thing there is Eli Manning has struggled all season long. Odell Beckham has struggled all season long. It has seemed like his best game was the game against the Panthers, threw for a touchdown, caught a touchdown. The game, the game is bad when they're like, Odell, Eli can't do it, so can you throw the ball for us? I think that it's been a tough season for New York. Everyone knows it. Everyone can see that. Is Eli Manning holding back Odell Beckham's value? And is he basically holding it hostage with each and every week?
I mean, I'm going to say, I don't know if I'm going to blame Eli. I'm blaming the offensive line. And the reason why is I like how everyone likes to blame Eli Manning. But it's not, to me, I don't think it's entirely his fault. If the offensive line was better and could actually protect for Eli, maybe if he had a little bit more time, like you made the comment, I think it was yesterday on the Primetime Podcast, where it's basically hike 1, 2, child's pose. Like that's about the most time that he has in the backfield. There are flashes where against Houston, Odell Beckham had 9 catches, 109 yards, 19.9 points. Or against Carolina, where he had a touchdown, had 31 points. Really, the only game to me where he was absolutely terrible PPR was against Dallas, where he only had 4 receptions for 51 yards. So I would say if you're in a PPR league, no. Eli is not hurting Odell's value. The thing with Odell, though, is if you're in, like you, Brandon, in our personal league, if it is a non-PPR league, then you're worried about Odell because you're not getting the points from the receptions that he is getting.
Well, that's the whole problem. Is right now Odell Beckham is not a reliable wide receiver. He had 11 points against Jacksonville, and this is from a standard non-PPR. He had 11 points against Jacksonville, 5 against Dallas, 1 against Houston, 7 against New Orleans, 23 against Carolina, 4 against Philly. I mean, this is a guy where it's good, bad, good, bad, good, bad. I mean, that's literally how it's gone. And I'm saying good at 11 and 10. That's not great. I mean, it's double digits. It's okay, but that's not going to be, if that's your best wide receiver, yikes, that's not good. So Odell right now, I mean, I don't necessarily like him making his frustrations public to the media, but I get it. Every single bit of his frustration. Nothing's going right for this team. You finally draft a running back who can run and who can catch passes and who is uber talented, and you still can't open up the passing game. So I understand his frustrations, and to some point, eventually, yes, the offensive line is bad. That's been documented very, very well, I think, by myself on these podcasts that we've done. I have absolutely criticized them. I think for good reason. They've underperformed every single week. But when does it come to the point where you say, it's also on the quarterback? It's on this quarterback to be able to make some plays, to make some plays continue. You know, there's no play, and everyone knows it. Certainly every New York Giant football fan. Eli is not going to be able to extend any play. He's not going to be able to do what Patrick Mahomes is able to do. He's not going to be able. He doesn't have the escapability. Eli's escapability on Madden is -10. So it's at that point where we know the offensive line is bad, but there's nothing that Eli's doing that's making the situation any better. And that's, I think, where Odell is also getting upset, is that there is no route that he can run deep down the field, because by the time that he's even started to get into the route, the play's over. The play is over. It's because there was a sack or a pass at the feet of Barkley. So there's problems there. There's problems there, and I think that it is a little bit on Eli that is holding Odell's stats, or what could be his stats, captive.
Well, and I'm going to go on and say that, I mean, of course it's not going to be all one or the other. I think that when people go, oh, is Eli to blame? Yeah, he's to blame. Let's remember the offensive line is a problem as well. But I want to ask you a question. Since you do own Odell Beckham in some of your leagues, I want to ask you this. As an Odell owner, and this is for what Odell owners should do maybe, is based off of how the Giants have been and how Odell Beckham has been, have you been tempted just to say, you know what, screw it. I'm going to bite the bullet, and I'm just going to bench Eli and find it, or not Eli, bench Odell and find a different option of a guy that maybe I can trust better than Odell? If you're especially in a non-PPR like you are in our personal MVP league.
No, I haven't done it yet because I am still hoping that he will break out one of these days and that he will hit his stride and just keep going. And it's really hard. And I think that anyone else who has Odell Beckham would also say he's like one of those guys you can't pull him from your lineup. You know, he's just too valuable, and he's too, you know, could have a big game on any given Sunday. And I feel, and I also, the other guy I have is also Mike Evans. I feel the same thing with Mike Evans. And Mike Evans, for the last couple of weeks has been painful to watch. He started off 20-12-19. He's gone 5 bye week and then 5. And then Odell Beckham, has gone 4-23-7. So it's been tough. And I've got Emmanuel Sanders as the other one. And Sanders has been, kind of that up and down a little bit too. Then I've got Brandon Cooks, and he's been the same way. There's not one guy I have on my team at the wide receiver position that is solid every single week, like 10 and above.
Mm-hmm.
That has not happened, and that's supposed to happen for Odell Beckham. That's supposed to happen for Mike Evans. It's supposed to.
Here's a question, or here's a thing that I'm going to say is I'm kind of in the same boat in our MVP personal league with Gronkowski, where this was a guy I drafted to be the best tight end in fantasy football, and since his 16-point performance week 1, he's had 1, 5, 4, 7, and then 9 this past week, to where I have been in the same boat that I just asked you about with Eli, where there have been weeks where I'm like, I'm going to bench Gronk, and then you're like, duh, idiot, you can't, because the moment you bench him, he's going to have like a 16, 20-point game, and you're going to feel stupid for benching Gronkowski.
Well, Ricky, that was your problem to begin with, is you thought Gronk was going to be the best tight end in the game. It's clearly Travis Kelce.
I should have went with Travis Kelce, but I went with Gronkowski because in the past when I've had Gronk, he hasn't let me down. I mean, when I won our league championship a couple years ago, I won it with Gronk if you're horny because I traded for Gronk mid-season.
Well, you know what? That was so 2016.
I know.
That's the problem. That's the problem. But I get it. I get where you're at. These guys are guys that are hard to come from your lineup.
Mm-hmm.
It's different if it's like a Kenny Stills. Well, Kenny Stills had a good week, but he's not gonna. We know he's not gonna have that week in and week out. Odell Beckham, you expect him to have it week in and week out. Mike Evans, you expect him to have it. Gronkowski, you expect him to have that. Either 100-yard for all these guys, either 100-yard performance and a touchdown, or kind of the and/or. It's either you put up 100 yards, or you get a touchdown. So the fact that some days they're not even doing either is really hurting anyone who has those guys. And it's not time to move on from them. It's not time to move on from them because, I guess a lot of times I think of my dynasty league that I have.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times of the long term. In a number of leagues, there is no keeper league, which I am completely against the non-keeper leagues. I think every league should be a keeper league. It's, kind of how you build up a team. But if you're not going to hold on to them for the next season, sometimes I think, why not trade them? Trade them to somebody who really loves them, who's in love with them. And if you're hurting another position, go and try and get somebody for that other position. Why not?
In my mind, there's only one person that is against keeper leagues, and that's people who are shitty drafters. Like, if you draft well and you're happy with your team at the end of your draft, then you'll be fine in a keeper league. Like, for example, you said in your big money league you get 8 keepers, right?
Yeah, I mean that's a clear dynasty league. There's another ESPN league that I do that we do 2 keepers.
All right, but if I for example, this year, just to give the listeners an example, if I did your dynasty league with the team that I currently have, my 8 keepers would be Todd Gurley, Melvin Gordon, DeAndre Hopkins, Juju Smith, Mark Ingram, Calvin Ridley would be 6. I get 2 more that I get to pick from. I guess I would do either Gronk and Kirk Cousins, or Kirk Cousins and the Broncos D. Like, my team would be stacked year after year if I had 8 keepers like your dynasty league.
But not even necessarily, because because we didn't draft normally. If you drafted normally,
True.
we're not having, none of us are having the teams that we have.
But imagine if we did Keeper League or Dynasty League the way we draft.
Sure. I mean, all of us should have solid teams every year, but the interesting thing is if you are keeping those 8 players then, and what does come into play in this big league that I've been in since I think I was in 6th grade, and I have won the Super Bowl twice, just saying. Won it in 8th grade. That was the first time. Because in 8th grade, I was super smart in the world of fantasy football.
Well, you had so much time. You had so much time to focus on it.
Well, not necessarily. If you think about it, you were in school more time in 8th grade than you were in college.
Yeah. But let's be honest. I wasn't focusing on school. I was focusing on who I'm going to pick up on the waiver wire later today, or whose stats am I going to look at because I need to pick up people.
Heck yeah, exactly. But it makes you really have to put a lot of emphasis on that draft, and you put a lot of emphasis on the rookies. There is a lot more emphasis on the rookies. Like this year, the number 1 pick in both drafts there's 24 teams. There's 12 in one conference. There's 12 in another, and for both those drafts, the number 1 pick was Saquon Barkley. It's not, you don't have Todd Gurley available. You don't have Le'Veon Bell available. There's more trading that goes on, but you really have to be looking at, digging deep and seeing who can you try and go and get. 2 of the running backs that I took, I really needed running backs, and hell, I still do in that league. Currently, trying to get some trade offers out there, but I took Royce Freeman and Kerryon Johnson. Those are the 2 running backs that were available. That were available when it came to me. You don't have those. I'll just pick up Joe Mixon.
Yeah.
I'll just pick up, Devonta Freeman. If he's healthy. I wouldn't pick up Freeman because I know he's a walking injury bug. But it's fun truly because you have to be so strategic when it comes to your draft. And a lot of times, people don't necessarily have to be. Or they don't feel like they have to be because there's the whole plethora of players out there. I think a lot of people might disagree with me in the terms of the 8-keeper like Dynasty League, but I love it. That is probably one of the funnest leagues that I'm in because it's fun. You have to think. There's a lot of different things that go into your draft. Your waiver wire, it is a really interesting league, and I like it a lot, and I'm really struggling in it, and it has me very upset. Well,
2 things. First off, the only thing I would hate for a Dynasty League is, like, if you have Odell this year in your Dynasty League, because it's like, great, like, usually, I wasn't going to not keep him, but now he's useless for me, so what do I do? And also, just to explain for if you might be a new listener, how our unique draft for the MVP Personal League is that everyone's name goes into a pot, and each and every round, the order for the round is drawn. So, like, I could have the first pick in round 1, but then have the last pick in round 2, or have, like, the 5th pick in round 3. So I'm not in a consistent spot. And then each round also has a theme, like quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and that's drawn out of a pot at the beginning of each round. So you don't know what you're drafting or where you're drafting until those are drawn at the beginning of the round. It's unique. Some people might think about it and go, ooh, I don't like that. But this is the second year we've done it, and I absolutely love it, mainly because my luck has been impeccable the last 2 years, and I've had some pretty good teams that can at least get me to the playoffs and get me my winnings back.
Yeah, I enjoy it. I think it's kind of fun. I think it's a neat way to do it. Now, not everyone is going to like that or agree with that, but I think it's kind of interesting. The next thing that I want to go into, and it's the final thing. It's the usual right here at the end. It's who are you targeting off the waiver wire for this week. Who did you really like? Who you think, if you can go and get them, go and get them? And then who are some of the people that you're like, okay, I'm throwing these people back onto the waiver wire because maybe someone's trash is someone else's treasure. But start off with the ones that you're targeting for this week.
Actually, for the one that I am targeting, it's actually, I'm going to bring him up, but I actually want to throw the question back at you because I want to basically ask should I even think of this guy as a pickup? He's only owned in 6% of ESPN leagues. He's a wide receiver who this week had 6 catches for 155 yards, 2 touchdowns. Yes, I know one of them came on like a 70-yard touchdown late in the game. He had 33 fantasy points if you're in PPR. But if Brock Osweiler is still going to be the quarterback for the Miami Dolphins, how much stock should I and other people be putting in Albert Wilson going up against Detroit this week after his 33-point outburst against the Bears defense?
I'm not buying it. I am not buying it. I'm not buying on Albert Wilson. I think there's too much inconsistency there. I think that he is the absolute definition of boom or bust. And you just can't buy into that. I don't. And that's why I wouldn't be doing it. There's plenty of people who will, but it's one of those things where you see what he's done, and then you put him into your lineup, and then he goes 5, 7, 4, and he goes right back onto the waiver wire if he isn't already there by the second week.
Another guy that I'm thinking about picking up in some of my leagues is a guy that you once owned, I believe, on one of your teams, Brandon. I'll let you guess who I'm going to say. He's an Atlanta Falcons player.
Was it Mohamed Sanu?
Not Mohamed Sanu. Going with Austin Hooper is one that I'm thinking about.
Son of a gun.
He has won in the last 2 weeks, 9 receptions each, 77-71, had a touchdown this past week. In PPR leagues, 16.7, 22.1. Going up against the Giants this week, he is one that if you need a tight end, I know in my Gronk league, I'm thinking about maybe putting a waiver pickup in on the Hoop Show and maybe benching Gronk, but I don't know if I'm going to pull that trigger. But he is a tight end if you need one because there's not many of them. He could be one that you pick up.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that a lot because the last 2 weeks, Austin Hooper has been targeted a whole lot. It's also helped that this past week for sure that Calvin Ridley and Mohamed Sanu both got hurt and they had to leave the game, and it was basically either Hooper or Julio. I mean, that's basically what it came down to. I think you can keep rolling with Hooper. I think that maybe the yardage isn't always going to be there, but he could rack up about 7 catches. Let's say he only has 40 yards. 11 points out of your tight end, and he wouldn't even be someone that I would consider an elite tight end. That's not bad. Then a touchdown is just gravy on top of that. So I would keep rolling with Austin Hooper.
And then for the one guy that I am staying away from, is this like on waivers or somebody that you're not going to drop, but you're just not going to start this week? On either on waivers or someone that you have seen and you would assume that a lot of people have them on their team, and you're like, you know what, it's just time to cut them on. The guy, I'm going to go with the guy that's on waivers that I'm going to say stay away from. And this is another Miami guy. I don't know if I believe in Frank Gore yet. I know he had 12.9. You might be thinking, hey, Ricky, with buys coming up, I might need a flex option or a running back option for some of the teams because we got 4 teams on bye, especially if you're like a James Conner owner this week. I know he had over 100 yards against the Bears. I know he had 12.9 in fantasy and PPR where you're thinking, oh, that's not a bad game from the running back. He is just one that I know people are going to look at because of his game. And I don't know. Maybe I stay away from Frank Gore, but maybe I'm just being a hypocrite for saying, I'm going to ask about Albert Wilson, but then tell you to stay away from Frank Gore.
I don't know necessarily with that. I think that the passing game's a little bit more dynamic for Miami than that running game probably ever will be this season. But, yeah, I'm with you. I'm not so sure because, when you finally thought, it's going to be Frank Gore, then in that Cincinnati game, it's back to Kenyon Drake. And, it's kind of that back and forth of who's it going to be. Mm-hmm. And even when it's Frank Gore, you're not getting that much. I mean, he's not getting that much. So he got over 100 yards this week. He didn't score. 10 points is 10 points. But you're going to want a little bit more from your running back position.
How about you? Who are you staying away from?
Well, I'll start off first with who I would target. And who I would target, if you can, I would go for running back. If you're looking at running back, Corey Clement, the running back from Philadelphia. This is a guy who may not be getting as many snaps as Wendell Smallwood, but Corey Clement, he is turning his snaps into touchdowns. He had 14 touches in the game against the Giants, 69 yards, and 1 touchdown. That was a pretty good week for him. And another guy, and this may have been mentioned last week, but I'll mention it again this week, Christian Kirk, the wide receiver from Arizona. I think that Josh Rosen is developing a pretty good rapport with this guy. This is someone you might want to look at if you are hurting for that at that wide receiver position. If you are an owner of Odell Beckham and you're just going, you know what, son of a gun, I need to add somebody else here. I'll keep Odell, but I need to add somebody else. That may be a guy that you go with.
Yeah, I mean, Christian Kirk's a guy where I've looked at him a couple weeks, but I don't know if I'm going to pull that trigger on him in some of my leagues.
One of the guys who I'll tell you that I'm staying away from, huge week this past weekend, but I think that's a fluke, Tyrell Williams from the Chargers. He had a huge week. He had 3 catches. 2 of those were for touchdowns. But this guy has been, it's like Phillip Rivers finally found him. It's like he walked out of the closet and I was like, Tyrell, where you been? Because that's how it's been. That's exactly how it's been. He had 2 catches for 8 yards and a touchdown against the Chiefs. And that was his best week until week 5, where he had 66 yards on 3 catches. And then this past week on 4 targets, only 4 targets, 3 catches, 118 yards, and 2 touchdowns against the Browns. He has been targeted, the most times he's been targeted, can you guess, Ricky?
The most times, I'm going to say 4.
5.
Okay, that was I was going to say 5, but then I second-guessed myself and said 4.
He's been targeted 5 times twice, the Chiefs and the 49ers. The Bills, the Rams, and the Raiders, he was targeted 3 times, and then against the Browns, 4 times. Tyrell Williams, great game last week, probably wasn't in your lineup, and he shouldn't be going forward.
Yeah, and I mean, he's one where there's a couple guys like that too, where it's like I mentioned with Mark Ingram, where it was like, yeah, he got most of the carries because of Alvin Kamara not being used as much, but it all depends on if he doesn't get those 2 touchdowns, he doesn't have as good as a fantasy performance as he did. I would probably wait a little bit on Wilson, you said, from the Chargers. I would wait on him because to see if he can have touchdowns in this next game as they go up against the Titans.
And this is my final one. This is one that I want your thoughts on because I'm not quite sure. It's one of those where I'm not quite sure, but you still may want to go and try and get them.
Say it one more time, Brandon. You're not quite what?
I said I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure if you go and get him right now. or if you wait a week.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of those where if you think you can wait a week, you probably can't. If he's available, Marquise Goodwin. Marquise Goodwin from San Francisco. This is a guy who has missed a number of games. He's missed 3 games with injury. And in the 3 games that he was in, he had 3 catches for 30 yards and a touchdown against the Chiefs. He had 2 catches for 24 yards against the Chargers. And then against the Packers, 4 catches, 126 yards, 2 TDs. This a guy, Ricky, that you think 3 games, 3 touchdowns could explode at any moment. Number 1 wide receiver on this team, even with C.J. Beathard at quarterback. Is this a guy that maybe, if he's available, you go and try and snag him?
If I pick him up, I am picking him up and stashing him this week. It would basically be, all right, I'll pick you up, I'll stash you, and then see what you're going to do, because obviously this week might show that, hey, you don't have to worry about C.J. Beathard being the quarterback. We're going to do just fine. Like, I'm going to do just fine with him as my quarterback. The only thing is he available? Because 43% of leagues he is owned in, like in our What's Your Fantasy League, he is owned by Hide and Zeke, which is Austin's team. But if he's available, I pick him up, see how he does this week, because the next week he's going up against the Rams, which don't really like that matchup. But after the Rams, Arizona, Oakland, Giants, after the bye, Tampa Bay, Seattle, those could be some good matchups fantasy for him to do some things, even with C.J. Beathard over Jimmy Garoppolo.
Well, Ricky, any final thoughts before we wrap things up here?
My only final thought is I hope that I remember to check our team and that we get a win, because currently we are tied for our division and we shouldn't be. We should probably be 5-1. Although I will say Dallas had a really good week this week, and hats off to Dallas, but we'll be coming for you.
Yes, Ricky, I would very much like you to check the league as well. That's very important. That actually, because there's a lot on the line here.
I'm just going to quit my day job and just check our fantasy league full time.
If you don't mind, that'd be appreciated. So thank you. Let me know when you've submitted that resignation letter.
Okay.
Well, folks, that is going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you so much for listening. Always enjoy having you in. Hope you enjoy our discussion. And certainly be part of it. Be part of it. And that is where I kind of go right into some things here at the end. Go and check out patreon.com. Become a patron of MVP. Just for $1 a month, you can support. For $10 a month, you can come on a podcast. You can just, shoot the crap here with Ricky and I about fantasy football. Give us your thoughts, what you think, what you want to talk about. We are all about that. Or you can go on another podcast here on MVP. You can definitely do all of that. It's a really fun time, and you certainly know it if you are a loyal listener, which we hope that you are. Also, go to mostvaluablepodcast.com and get an MVP T-shirt. Dave Oster is modeling the T-shirts there. And then finally, go to iTunes and give us that 5-star rating if you think that we are deserving of it. And leave a comment. Let us know what your thoughts were about the podcast, about the episode. We are always happy to hear about that. And certainly leave your comments here for our YouTube listeners. Certainly will be listeners this week. No viewers. You can view it, but you ain't going to be looking at much. Let us know what you think, what your thoughts are on everything that we talked about. Do you think that Adam Thielen is the best wide receiver in fantasy football right now? What are your thoughts on Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram sharing that backfield? Do you think that Eli is holding back Odell? And then what are your thoughts on the wide receiver, not the wide receiver, but the waiver wire targets, wide receiver, running back, quarterback, whoever it might be? Who are you going after? Who don't you like? Who do you need to get off your team that needs to be on the waiver wire? So for Ricky Widmer, I'm Brandon Swanson saying so long, everybody. Thanks again for listening this week. It is the 8th episode of What's Your Fantasy. Have a great rest of your week. Have a wonderful weekend, and enjoy Week 7 in the NFL.